Imagine a bomb inside your ribcage that triggers if you try to remove it. For Elias, this nightmare is real. His pacemaker has been hacked, rigged with a deadly anti-tamper mechanism that turns his own heartbeat into a ticking clock with only 48 hours left. Surgery is a death sentence. The only cure is a suicide mission. Alongside his loyal dog Shadow, Elias must infiltrate a high-tech submarine to steal the encryption key before his pulse hits zero. The gray mist of Lake Michigan hung heavy over the water, thick enough to taste. On the rusted deck of the Marlin, a weathered fishing trawler that had seen better decades, Elias knelt beside the exposed engine block. He was a man of 42 years, though the deep lines etched into his rough complexion suggested a life measured in storms rather than calendars. He wiped grease onto his durable blue jeans, shivering slightly inside his worn-out canvas work jacket. Beside him sat Shadow. The German Shepherd's silver and gray coat seemed to blend perfectly with the fog, his amber eyes fixed on his master. Suddenly, the dog stood up, his ears swiveling forward. A low, worried whine vibrated in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Elias asked, his voice raspy from the damp air. Before the dog could respond, a sharp, rhythmic beeping sound erupted, not from the boat's console, but from Elias's own chest. He gasped, clutching his sternum as a jolt of artificial electricity spasmed through his ribs. It felt as though a cold hand had squeezed his heart. He collapsed against the gunwale, gasping for air. His smartwatch lit up with a harsh red glare against the gloom. The text was simple and terrifying. Server connection lost. Backup battery, 48 hours. Elias stared at the screen. The contract was up. 13 years ago, a Russian arms dealer named Kozlov had saved Elias from a diving accident by implanting a modified pacemaker. Now that debt was due. If Elias did not surrender himself, the device would simply stop beating. Miles away, the atmosphere was equally suffocating, though for a different reason. The reception hall was decorated with white flowers, but the wedding had been shattered. Director Vance, a cold man representing the EITC Security Corporation, stood over a terrified young man. This is Mateo, a brilliant network engineer currently wearing a tuxedo disheveled by a struggle. Nearby, 2 security guards held Sarah, his bride, who struggled against their grip. "You want your wife back?" Vance asked, his voice smooth and devoid of empathy. "Then bring me Elias. He holds the map to the underwater fiber optic cables. Without that map, we cannot find where Kozlov hides his data. You have 24 hours. Hours later, the sound of a car engine cut through the silence of the misty dock where the Marlin was moored. Shadow barked deeply, a warning that echoed off the metal hull. Elias, still pale and clutching his chest, staggered to the deck. Mateo ran down the pier, his face pale with desperation. "Elias!" he shouted, breathless. "They took Sarah. They want the map." Elias looked at the young man, then down at his own wrist, where the countdown continued its silent march toward death. He realized their fates were now twisted together like the knots of a net. "I cannot help you with the map, kid," Elias grunted, fighting the pain in his chest, "unless you can help me hack a heart." Under the cover of a moonless night, Elias and Mateo navigated their way through the labyrinth of a sprawling automotive scrapyard on the outskirts of the city. Shadow, the silver and gray German Shepherd, took the lead. His nose twitched constantly, dissecting the scents of rusted metal, oil, and wet earth. He moved with a silent confidence, his large paws finding secure footing among the jagged debris where a human might stumble. They stopped before a rusted shipping container buried beneath a mountain of crushed sedans. Elias knocked a specific rhythm on the steel door. A moment later, the heavy locks disengaged with a loud metallic clank that echoed through the yard. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of ozone and soldering iron. Walls of monitors flickered with cascading data streams. Sitting in a modified dentist S-chair surrounded by keyboards was Madame Wu. She was a frail, elderly woman with wispy white hair and thick, black, opaque goggles covering her eyes. Despite her blindness, her fingers danced across a custom Braille interface with terrifying speed. She was a legend in the underworld, a white hat hacker who had vanished from the grid in 1999. Shadow approached her gently and rested his chin on her knee. Madame Wu smiled, her wrinkled hand finding the dog's head unerringly. "German Shepherd," she croaked, her voice dry like old paper. "High anxiety, loyal to a fault. And you brought guests, Elias?" Mateo stepped forward, his tuxedo now stained and torn. "Madam, Elias has a bomb in his chest. We need to surgically remove the pacemaker immediately." Madame Wu let out a sharp, cynical laugh. She spun her chair around and picked up a handheld scanner, waving it over Elias's chest. A 3D schematic of the device appeared on a large monitor. "Look closer, engineer," Wu said, pointing at the screen. "Do you see those barbs hooking into the arterial walls?" Kozlov installed a sophisticated anti-tamper mechanism. If a scalpel touches the casing, or if his heart rate drops due to anesthesia, the device will discharge 50,000 volts directly into the cardiac muscle. He would be dead before you cut the skin. Elias stared at the image of his own heart, feeling the cold weight of the machine inside him. "Then, how do we stop it?" "We have to put it into safe mode," Wu explained, typing rapidly. "But to do that, we need two things. First, we need the source signal. That comes from the server box, a portable command unit Kozlov buried on Dead Horse Island. It acts as the router for his control network." "And the second thing?" Mateo asked. "Authentication," Wu replied. "The server box is locked behind military-grade encryption. You need the physical administrator keycard to open the system. And Kozlov keeps that card on his person at all times, aboard his stealth submarine, the Leviathan." The room fell silent, save for the hum of the cooling fans. The mission was clear, but it was suicide. "We have to split up," Elias said, his voice steady. "Shadow and I know Dead Horse Island. The terrain is rigged with motion sensors and old traps. Shadow can smell the electric current. He can guide me through. I will secure the server box." Mateo nodded, though his hands were trembling. "That leaves the submarine to me. My father." "Bill? He is the chief engineer on the Leviathan. If I can get on board a supply ship, maybe I can find him. He might help me get close enough to Kozlov to steal the key card." Madame Wu turned back to her screens. "You have 40 hours left, gentlemen. I suggest you get moving." The supply ship rocked gently against the dark steel hull of the Leviathan, a stealth submarine surfacing briefly under the cover of a heavy fog in the middle of Lake Michigan. Mateo, disguised in a nondescript gray maintenance uniform, kept his head down as he carried a crate of air filters across the gangway. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm compared to the cold mechanical hum of the submarine. Once inside, the air smelled of recycled oxygen and diesel. Mateo slipped away from the work crew, navigating the narrow corridors toward the engine room. There, amidst the labyrinth of pipes and hissing valves, stood a man who looked like a ghost from a forgotten life. It was Bill, Mateo's father. He was a shell of the man Mateo remembered. His skin was pale and sallow from years without sunlight, and grease stained the deep wrinkles around his tired eyes. He moved with a robotic efficiency, checking gauges. "Dad," Mateo whispered, stepping from the shadows. Bill froze. He turned slowly, his eyes widening in disbelief before hardening with fear. "You should not be here," he hissed, grabbing Mateo's arm. "Kozlov kills intruders." "He has Sarah," Mateo replied, his voice cracking. "I need the key card." Bill looked at his son, conflict warring in his gaze. Then, with a resigned sigh, he picked up a heavy wrench. "Hide." Bill slammed the wrench against a high-pressure valve. A hiss of steam erupted, followed by the blare of emergency sirens. A computerized voice announced a cooling system failure. Moments later, heavy boots clanged on the metal grating. Kozlov entered, flanked by guards. He was a hulking man, shouting orders in Russian. To override the shutdown, Kozlov pulled a lanyard from his neck. Attached to it was a black magnetic keycard. He shoved it into the master terminal to authorize the manual reset. As steam filled the room, blinding the guards, Bill feigned a coughing fit, stumbling into Kozlov. In that split second of confusion, Mateo reached out from his hiding spot behind the console. With the sleight of hand of a desperate man, he swapped the card in the terminal with a replica Madame Wu had prepared, snatching the real one before disappearing into the steam. Miles away, on the desolate shores of Dead Horse Island, Elias and Shadow faced a different kind of danger. The island was a graveyard of military history, littered with concrete bunkers from the World War era. Shadow stopped abruptly, his ears perking up. The German shepherd let out a low, vibrating growl, his hackles raising along his spine. "What is it?" Elias asked, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. Shadow did not move forward. Instead, he began to weave a strange, serpentine path through the underbrush. Elias realized the dog was sensing the high-frequency hum of active infrared sensors hidden in the trees. Trusting the animal completely, Elias followed Shadow's exact footsteps. They reached a clearing where an old bunker sat half buried in the earth. Shadow sniffed at the rusted doorframe, then pawed at a specific patch of loose soil near the foundation. Elias knelt and began to dig. His fingers brushed against cold metal. It was a heavy, reinforced aluminum case, the server box. Elias pulled it free, the device heavy in his hands. He looked at Shadow, who stood guard, watching the dark woods. They had the heart. Now they just needed the key. The rendezvous point was a desolate cathedral of industry, an abandoned shipyard where the skeletons of unfinished vessels rusted beneath the gray sky. Elias arrived first, the heavy aluminum server box weighing down his arms like a physical manifestation of his guilt. He set it down on a workbench covered in decades of grime. Beside him, Shadow paced restlessly, his claws clicking softly on the concrete floor. The dog paused frequently to sniff the damp air, his ears swiveling toward the sound of water lapping against the rotting pier. A few minutes later, a small motorboat drifted into the bay. Mateo climbed onto the dock, dripping wet and shivering, clutching a waterproof bag to his chest. He looked exhausted, his eyes wide with the adrenaline of his escape from the submarine. "I have it," Mateo gasped, pulling out the plastic keycard. It looked insignificant, just a thin piece of plastic, yet it held the power to save them all. "Connect it," Elias ordered, his hand instinctively going to his chest where the pacemaker beat its frantic dying rhythm. "We have to reset the system now." Mateo hesitated, looking at the server box. "If we reset it, Kozlov keeps his power. We should destroy this box, Elias. If we smash the transmitter inside, Kozlov's empire falls. My father goes free. Sarah goes free." "If you destroy that box," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous, "my heart stops beating in 40 hours. Before Mateo could respond, a harsh, mechanical voice cut through the silence. "An inspiring dilemma, gentlemen." A figure emerged from the shadows of a rusting crane. It was Graves. He was a tall, imposing man with a shaved head and a scar running through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from his days as a disgraced federal agent. Now he wore the tactical gray uniform of Vance's private security force. He held a high-voltage taser rifle leveled directly at Elias. "Hand over the box," Graves commanded. "Vance pays better than Kozlov." Shadow did not wait for a command. Sensing the immediate threat to his master, the German shepherd launched himself across the gap. He moved as a blur of silver and gray motion. Graves fired, but the taser dart missed Elias by inches, sparking violently against the metal wall. Shadow slammed into Graves' chest, the impact knocking the mercenary backward. Graves shouted in surprise, dropping the weapon as he grappled with the powerful dog. Shadow did not bite to maim. He pinned the man down, barking ferociously close to his face. "Get the box," Elias yelled to Mateo. But Graves was a trained operative. He pulled a pin on his vest and rolled away. A sharp hiss filled the air, followed instantly by a thick cloud of white tactical smoke. The shipyard was plunged into a blinding, choking fog. Shadow barked in confusion, unable to see or smell his target through the chemical haze. Elias stumbled forward, his hands grasping at empty air. A heavy engine roared to life from the water's edge. The sound of a high-powered jet ski cut through the smoke. As the white cloud slowly lifted, Elias and Mateo stood alone on the dock. The workbench was empty. Graves was gone, a fading wake on the water marking his escape. He had taken the server box. Elias looked down at his hands. They were empty. Mateo stood frozen, still clutching the useless key card. They had the key, but the heart was gone. The sky above Lake Michigan did not darken with clouds, but with a mechanical plague. From the distant horizon, a low, vibrating hum began to build, sounding like a million angry hornets. It was the hunter. Kozlov had discovered the theft of the key card, and in his rage he had unleashed his autonomous drone swarm. On the deck of the Marlin, the air was thick with panic. Sarah, who had arrived moments earlier in a small, high-speed rescue boat to extract Mateo, stood gripping the railing. Her hair whipped around her face in the rising wind. She pointed at the sky, then at Elias. "It is you, Elias!" she screamed over the noise of the approaching swarm. "The drones are not looking for the ship. They are tracking the radio frequency of your pacemaker. You are the beacon." Elias looked down at his chest. The device inside him was fluttering, reacting to the incoming signal. He looked at Mateo and Sarah, then at Shadow. The German shepherd was pacing frantically, barking at the black cloud descending from the north. "If I stay, we all die," Elias realized. He made his decision, his face hardened into a mask of determination. "Get in the rescue boat," Elias shouted, pushing Mateo toward the ladder. "I need to go below deck and disconnect the fuel line, or the explosion will take us all out. Go." Mateo hesitated, but Sarah pulled him into the smaller vessel. They huddled together, waiting for Elias to join them. Elias did not go below deck. Instead, he walked to the stern where the heavy towing rope connected the rescue boat to the Marlin. He pulled a serrated knife from his belt. Shadow, standing on the edge of the rescue boat, suddenly realized what was happening. The dog let out a sharp, piercing bark, his amber eyes locking onto Elias. Shadow coiled his powerful muscles, preparing to leap across the widening gap back onto the trawler to be with his master. Elias saw the jump coming. He knew that if Shadow returned to the Marlin, the dog would burn with him. He had to break the animal's heart to save its life. Elias stood tall, his figure framed by the approaching drone swarm. He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah, who was huddled in the boat. "Stay!" Elias roared, his voice cracking with emotion. "Guard them!" The command hit Shadow like a physical blow. The dog froze mid-coil. His training battled with his loyalty. He wanted to jump, to stand by Elias and face the fire, but the command was absolute. Guard. Protect. Elias slashed the rope. The rescue boat drifted away, caught by the current. Shadow stood on the prow, his body trembling violently. He did not bark again. Instead, a high, mournful whine escaped his throat, a sound of pure devastation. He watched as Elias turned his back, walking alone toward the wheelhouse of the Marlin to face the black storm descending from the sky. The engine of the Marlin groaned as Elias pushed the throttle to its limit, steering the trawler directly into the open waters of Lake Michigan. He glanced at his smartwatch. The battery indicator for his pacemaker flashed red. 1%. Above him, the sky darkened. The hunter swarm had locked onto the distress signal radiating from his chest. Hundreds of black drones swirled like a tornado, their collective hum vibrating through the steel deck plates. They were not aiming for the small rescue boat drifting away in the distance. They were coming for him. Elias moved with calm precision. He dragged every canister of propane and box of emergency flares he could find to the center of the deck. He opened the valves on the gas tanks, listening to the sharp hiss of escaping fuel mixing with the cold air. The swarm began its dive. It looked like a falling curtain of black metal. Elias pulled the pin on a distress flare. It ignited with a brilliant, blinding red light. He did not look for cover. He stood his ground, holding the burning flare high like a beacon. The heat sensors on the lead drones screamed in recognition, drawing the entire hive toward the intense thermal signature. "Come and get it," Elias whispered. He dropped the flare into the cloud of propane. From the safety of the drifting rescue boat, Mateo and Sarah shielded their eyes. A deafening roar tore through the silence of the lake. A massive sphere of orange and yellow fire erupted from the water, consuming the Marlin in a single heartbeat. The shockwave rolled over the water, rocking their small boat. Shadow stood at the bow of the rescue boat. He did not bark. He watched the burning wreckage sink beneath the waves, his ears flattened against his head. The signal from the pacemaker was gone. The connection was broken. Days later, the news cycles were dominated by Director Vance. His operative Graves had successfully delivered the server box. Vance now held the leash to Kozlov and his empire. The bad guys had won the battle, but the war was far from over. In the rusted sanctuary of the scrapyard, the mood was somber. Mateo, Sarah, and Shadow stood before Madame Wu. The blind hacker typed slowly on her keyboard, her face unreadable. "He is gone," Mateo said softly. Madame Wu stopped typing. She turned her chair, her black goggles reflecting the dim light. "Elias owes me a life," she rasped, "and I intend to collect. Do you have the courage to go where the maps end? To the dead zone?" Mateo and Sarah exchanged a look of confusion, then determination. They nodded. Madame Wu pressed a button on her console. The heavy steel door at the back of the room groaned open with the sound of grinding gears. A man stepped out from the shadows. He was tall, dressed in a tattered trench coat that smelled of brine and old seaweed. His skin was pale, as if he had spent too long under water. In his hand he held a crisp green apple. He took a loud, crunchy bite, chewing slowly as he looked at the group. It was Silas, the mercenary leader from years ago, a man everyone believed was dead. "I know the way to the dead zone," Silas said, a crooked smile playing on his lips. "But who is going to pay for the gas?" Sometimes the hardest command to give is the one that sends those we love away to safety. Elias reminds us that true heroism is often a quiet choice to face the storm alone, so others may see the dawn. If this story moved, you please leave a like and share it to keep the spirit of such loyalty alive. To march with us into the unknown and find what was lost, subscribe now and click the video appearing on your screen.